Hello, everyone, and welcome to ADDitude Magazine's ADHD Experts broadcast. We hope everyone is staying safe and staying well. We are pleased to have Ned Hallowell and John Ratey here to talk about the new research on ADHD and their new book, ADHD 2.0, and what it means for those diagnosed with the condition. Before we get started, let me note a couple of housekeeping items. Those of you tuned into the live webinar may download the slides now by clicking on the Event Resources section of your webinar screen. And if you are interested in the Certificate of Attendance option, look for instructions in the email you'll receive around an hour after the live broadcast. For those of you listening in replay or podcast mode, you can visit ADDitudemag.com and search podcast 348 to access the slides, the webinar replay, and the Certificate of Attendance option. And if you support the work we're doing here at ADDitude to strengthen the ADHD community, we encourage you to visit ADDitudemag.com/subscribe and sign up for ADDitude Magazine for your family or to share with a teacher or a loved one who could benefit from greater understanding of ADHD. And one more item, the sponsor of this week's ADDitude webinar is Play Attention. Play Attention improves executive function and self-regulation. For over 25 years, Play Attention has been helping children and adults thrive and succeed. Their program utilizes NASA-inspired technology and is founded on the latest research in neuroplasticity. Each program includes a lifetime membership and a personal executive function coach to customize your plan along the way. It is evidence-based and supported by research. Home and professional programs available. Call 800-788-6786 or click on the hyperlink on the screen to schedule your free one-on-one consultation. Or visit their website, www.playattention.com. Use coupon code ADDMAG0121 to receive $200 off a Play Attention program. ADDitude thanks our sponsors for supporting our webinars. Sponsorship has no influence on speaker selection or webinar content. Now for today's topic, something we're calling ADHD Clarified, based on Ned and John's new book, ADHD 2.0. Our understanding of ADHD has evolved considerably in the last 3 decades. Today, ADHD experts Dr. Ned Hallowell and Dr. John Ratey explain the latest and most consequential research along with the most effective techniques to manage it, based on their 30 years of working with patients. In this webinar, Hallowell and Ratey will help adults and children develop a constructive, hopeful view of ADHD. Ned Hallowell is a child and adult psychiatrist, leading authority in the field of ADHD, the host of Distraction, a weekly podcast for thriving in this crazy, busy world, New York Times best-selling author, world-renowned speaker, and the founder of the Hallowell Centers in Boston, Metro West, New York City, San Francisco, and Seattle. John Ratey is an associate clinical professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School and an internationally recognized expert in neuropsychiatry. He has published more than 60 peer-reviewed articles and 11 books, including the groundbreaking Driven to Distraction series with Ned Hallowell. With the publication of Spark, the revolutionary new science of exercise in the brain, Dr. Ratey has established himself as one of the world's foremost authorities on the brain-fitness connection. You can ask questions of Ned and John during their presentation, and we will get to as many of them as possible after they finish. So with all that being said, and that was certainly a lot, I'll turn it over to Ned and John. Thanks so much for being here today.
Well, thank you, Wayne, and thank you, John, and it's great to be doing this with you, John. John and I go back to 1979 when we met. I was a resident at the old Mass Mental Health Center, and John was my chief resident, and it's turned into a lifelong friendship from 1979 to 21, and it's been incredibly fun. I mean, it's wonderful to see a friendship, both collegial, professional, and personal, blossom and ripen as much as this one has. It's really an example of one of the elements we stress in our new book, which is the power of the human connection, and it's ever more needed these days with the distancing enforced by COVID. But I also really want to thank ADDitude and Wayne. They don't pay us to say this. In fact, they don't pay us to do anything. So we have no financial arrangement with them. But ADDitude is an incredibly valuable resource for the ADHD world. When patients used to come in person to my office, we couldn't keep the waiting room stocked with issues of ADDitude fast enough because people kept saying, "Can I take this with me?" It really is for a journal, popular magazine, the best of its kind. And I'm talking about better than Car and Driver, better than Bon Appetit, but better than any magazine like that in any field that I know. Every single issue is chock full of articles that really have valuable information. I read it religiously to learn, and supposedly I know a fair amount about this, but that magazine, if you have ADHD or know someone who has it, you must subscribe to it. It is without peer, and not just in the world of ADHD. It's an incredible magazine put together by a very small staff on a very low budget. So I urge you, if you don't subscribe, do subscribe. Tell your friends, tell your school. Absolutely, they should have it in the school library. Tell your pediatrician to make sure to put it in his or her office, and the same with whatever professional you see. And as I said, I was in no way prompted, coached, or paid to say what I just said. And I'm sure, John, you agree with it, correct?
I do. And thank you all for having us again. I love getting on with Ned and renewing our friendship, renewing our relationship, and renewing our passion about telling the world about attention deficit disorder. It's been such a ride, and you're right. ADDitude has sort of evolved over the course of time now, and is sort of the Rolls Royce of information about ADHD. And you're right, we learn stuff all the time because the field is so broad now, and so many things are popping. So it's good to keep up on it. So yes, and it's a delight to be with you again, Ned. We always have fun, and we hope we're going to have fun today too.
We already are. Well, that first slide is our model for ADHD. Russ Barkley years ago conceptualized ADHD as a condition of disinhibition, and we reframe that and say, the upside is you've got a Ferrari engine for a brain. You've got a race car with a brain, but your brakes aren't strong enough to control your brain. And so, we say a race car brain with bicycle brakes, and it really does sum up so much of what's going on. It also offers a shame-free way of intervening. If someone makes a mistake, instead of saying you dingbat or you bad person or you need more discipline, if you just say your brakes are failing you, there's no shame in that, and someone can work on that. It's a mechanical analogy. And so, okay, yeah, we got to tighten up our brakes, and then there's a host of ways of doing that. But it's an analogy that's proved over the years to be quite powerful, quite useful, easily comprehended, and neurologically accurate.
Right, and it's something that people need to understand, especially to take the fangs out of the diagnosis of ADHD, the deficit disorder. That's a big point in our new book, and it's something that I think people really need to appreciate, that it's not a deficit brain. I was on a call just recently, and a guy said, well, I was diagnosed with minimal brain when I was a kid, and or minimal brain dysfunction. And it's really not that. It's certainly not that. And that's what we hope to really put in people's minds these days.
But we renamed it. We had the audacity to come up with a different name because attention deficit disorder is absolutely inaccurate. John and I both have the condition ourselves, and we don't have a deficit of attention. Quite the opposite. We have an abundance of attention. Our challenge is to control it. So deficit is wrong. And the way we see it, it's not a disorder completely. Can it be a disorder? Yes, it can ruin your life, but it can also make your life. And there are millions of people whose lives have been enhanced by this condition. So we think it makes more sense to call it a trait. And the two key elements are the wandering of attention and the search for stimulation. So we've renamed it VAST, Variable Attention Stimulus Trait, VAST, VAST. It's vast in how much it takes in your life, a whole lot more than the caricatures would represent. And it is variable attention stimulus trait. So if you want a nice, far more accurate and far less insulting term, go with variable attention stimulus trait. And it is, as we note here, a spectrum of traits, all occurring on a spectrum from one level to the next. A wandering of attention, a wandering of stimulation. The mention of stimulation, I should add that our kryptonite is boredom. Boredom is our kryptonite. We repel from boredom like poles of a magnet. We just bounce off of it. We can't, not won't, we can't stay with boring. So when the teacher is boring, the book is boring, the movie is boring, the conversation is boring, we're out of there. If not physically, then mentally for sure. John will remember the time when there was a very formal lecture being given at the Harvard Faculty Club, and we were all attending dutifully. And the person who was giving the lecture, I won't mind mentioning his name because he'll laugh at it, but it was George Valiant, and he was having an off day, and he was mailing it in. It couldn't have been more boring. And I couldn't stand it. And I happened to be sitting next to a window, so I opened the window and jumped out. Now, fortunately, it was on the first floor, and I didn't hurt myself, but I literally had to get out of there. It's so excruciatingly boring. And those of you with ADHD know what I mean. It's not like a minor problem. We cannot tolerate boredom. We just can't. And so we make something else happen. Sometimes it's adaptive. We come up with a new idea. We advance the project, or sometimes it's maladaptive, like jumping out a window.
Yes, I do remember that. And it was very indicative of what it's like, and especially with COVID here. And we spend so much time in front of screens, on Zoom, on other platforms, and it really has caused a rapid increase in interest in ADD, especially for kids, but also for adults, because they're realizing something's amiss. They have to get back to their real life, because their real life involved more people, more movement, more different activities, and not just sitting in front of a screen, which is too much our lives at the present. So we're seeing a big increase in people going for the diagnosis, worrying about the diagnosis, going back and getting treatment that they abandoned years ago. It's because our environment has changed so greatly. And it is much more boring unless you fill it with interesting and information and more connections, which you can certainly do with the Zooming world.
We could probably go on to the next slide. Okay, now this is new. And for those of you who are looking for what's new in the world of ADHD, pay attention to this slide. It's an incredibly powerful concept. John and I have found it with our patients just unbelievably useful. So try to drill down your attention on this and try to grasp it. It absolutely will give you the remedy to brooding, ruminative, negative self-talk. So John, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, the little slide on your left is a picture of an fMRI that is a constant signature when people get in the fMRI and they're told not to think of anything, let their mind wander. Well, what you see, those lit up red areas, are areas of the brain that are very active. And we now think of the brain's working as a bunch of what are called connectomes, or networks, rather than a single solitary place. And these networks always go together. And this one that's shown there was a very important one. It's called the default mode network, when you're not thinking of anything. And this is really important because people with ADD have a really good default mode network. And opposed to that in general, and this is very simplified idea, is the task positive network, meaning we are into paying attention to something. And when this happens in the so-called neurotypical person, the default mode network diminishes, it drops down, it isn't as powerful, so that you can put all your energy into what you're trying to pay attention to. However, what we found is with the ADHD brain, the default mode doesn't sync, doesn't shut up as much as it does in the normal situation. It's constantly begging for attention itself, if you will. It acts as a magnet on our attention, so it pulls you away from being attentive. And this leads to trouble, and it leads to distractibility, and you can get trapped in the default mode because within that we contain our history and our feelings and our attitudes, our self-concept, all that sort of swirling around there. And if you get stuck in there and you have a tendency to go to the bad news, to go to what you're really worried about, you can get stuck in ruminations.
A good way to think about it, let's say you're doing something, you're painting a picture, you're singing a song, you're writing a paper. When the task is over, the task positive network shuts down. And what lights up is the default mode network, the DMN, which I call the demon. And the demon, when the default network lights up, it happens to be the seat of your imagination. But when your imagination is not engaged in a creative act for diabolical reasons, it tends to pour out a whole stream of negative thoughts, images, possibilities, and you sit sort of entranced by this horrible drama, horror show of everything that could possibly be wrong with you, with your life, with life in general. So you think you're stupid, you're ugly, you're not going anywhere. The world is going to hell. You're going to hell. Everything sucks. You suck. And you sit in this trance of negativity that people with ADD know only too well. And part of the reason is contentment, which is where most people go in the default mode network, is too boring for us. You don't say he was riveted in contentment, or she was riveted in contentment. But you do say she was riveted in fear, self-loathing, anxiety, fantasies of gloom and doom. That's gripping. It holds your attention. And the solution is not Prozac. The solution is not medication. The solution is don't feed the demon. What are you feeding it with? Your attention. So redirect your attention. It's that simple, but it's that difficult. It's very hard to look away from the horrible accident as you're driving past it. You tend to look right at it. Well, when that accident is in your imagination and it's your life, you've got to look away from it. Do something else. Call a friend, slap your face, jump up and down. As John will say later, exercise is a great way to redirect. But redirect your attention away from the demon. Don't feed the demon with your attention. It sounds simple, but it's profoundly helpful if you can discipline yourself to do it. Don't feed the demon. Don't keep paying attention to this stream of horrible negative stuff that we call rumination and brooding. It's a major problem in the world of ADHD, and the solution is not with medication. It's with this really simple cognitive trick.
Right, and yes, and we can help the switch work better, because there's a switch between the DMN and the task positive network that's a little bit off and it's glitchy, and this is where training can come in to get you off of it. But it's a very helpful concept to explain to people why they can't sustain their attention, why they can't persist, which is a big problem with people with ADD. They can't persist in their thinking, in their attention. And it's because they're being pulled away. As one person wrote about the DMN, it's a chatterbox, and it's constantly chattering away, and we get sucked back into it far too easy with the ADD person.
As one of my great heroes, Samuel Johnson, who wrote in the 18th century, anticipated this discovery when he talked about the disease of the imagination, the disease of the imagination. And that's the DMN gone awry. That's the DMN turning on you and feeding on you like a vulture. It's horrible. It's self-destructive. And the best way to control it is cognitive, is redirecting your attention. If only poor old Samuel Johnson had known about this during his life. Instead, he would spend hours in his bed in his flat in London every morning, just watching the water drip out of the faucet, just excoriating himself, just punishing himself with self-loathing. And it's I just wish I could go back 2.5 centuries and say, Sam, just get out of bed, walk over to the faucet and turn it off, and your DMN will shut down. Stop feeding it with your attention. Anyway, John and I are really we've been very impressed with how helpful this insight can be if you will use it and not let your DMN seduce you. We should probably go on to the next slide.
Next slide, yes. Another important new chapter in our book is about the cerebellum and the cerebellum connection, because we've learned over the recent 20 years or so how important the cerebellum is for not only movement. It's called the little brain. It lies beneath our big brain. And it's involved with coordination and balance, rhythm of our movements. And we only thought about that as a movement brain, but we now know that it directs and makes the timing, if you will, for our higher brain functions. And what we know with the ADD people, that their cerebellum is involved in the problem, that, balance and coordination are a big part of ADD, and more than 40% of people with ADD will be discoordinated, have trouble with coordination and balance and rhythm. That's a big part of the problem for me. For instance, I can't dance very well. And every time I do, my daughters freak out. And playing squash with Ned, I had to overcome my clumsiness for 30 years or so. And this does the same thing, not only for our coordination and movement of our muscles, but also our attention. So you really have to see it through a different lens.
The great breakthrough is that the cerebellum is connected to the frontal lobes. And we didn't know that before. When John and I were in medical school, we were just taught the cerebellum regulated balance and coordination. I should add, by the way, John was very graceful on the squash court. He's highlighting he wasn't clumsy a bit. He was very graceful, and he adapted from being a natural tennis player to being an excellent squash player. But be that as it may, the point is the breakthrough that Schmamann at Harvard and Mass General achieved is to discover the pathways from the cerebellum, from this little two little kumquats in the base and back of the brain that have 75% of the neurons of the brain. People don't realize that it's richly connected through the auditory system, through the vestibular auditory system to the prefrontal frontal cortex, where all the action is in cognition, emotion, control. And so it turns out that the cerebellum is very active in what we call ADHD. And indeed, there is a syndrome named after Jeremy Schmaman called Schmaman syndrome, that resulting from cerebellar injury due to stroke or trauma or infection, that looks exactly like ADHD. So it's really cool stuff and brand new, and it leads to a form of treatment that's in its, it's still being birthed. But I had occasion to use this a few years ago with a little boy in China named Boots. That's why you see the word Boots at the bottom there. A 7-year-old boy who in the space of 3 months went from being the bottom of his class, a major discipline problem, to by Christmas, the top of his class and getting a gold star for his behavior. And all we did was apply no medication whatsoever. We applied, first of all, creating a loving environment, the power of connection, getting rid of shame and humiliation, teaching him the model of the race car brain with the bicycle brakes, which he would say every day, race car brain, bicycle brakes. Mom would hug him and love him every day. And then he would do 10 or 15 minutes of these balancing exercises, standing on one leg with your eyes closed, sitting on a exercise ball with your feet off the floor. By the way, all of these are really good for your core as well as for balance. Standing on a wobble board with your eyes closed. Whenever you close your eyes, balancing becomes more difficult. If you want a quick at-home way of doing this, get dressed and undressed without sitting down. And then do it with your eyes closed. Do it close to your bed because you'll fall over at first. You don't want to hurt yourself. But it's not just good for balance. It's good for cognition, for control, for focus and attention. And that's a breakthrough, discovering that the cerebellum is very much involved in so-called higher cortical functions. We should probably go to the next slide.
Yeah, next slide.
Well, this one, it's a known fact, but it's not publicized nearly enough. And I think that's what John and I, you can say the same about exercise, but connection, if you list the risk factors for early death, everyone will list, cigarette smoking, high blood pressure, obesity, genetics, not wearing your seatbelt. People can rattle off risk factors for early death. What they don't know is that social isolation is right at the top of the list. Social isolation is as dangerous a risk factor for early death and disease as cigarette smoking. That was proven way back in the late 1970s by Lisa Berkman, and when she was at the Harvard School of, she was at Stanford then, now she's at Harvard School of Public Health. And it's a fact that for some reason doesn't get enough press. It's getting a lot more press because of COVID, because we've had this forced distance. But for some reason, people fear connection. And I think it's because connecting makes you feel vulnerable. Most of us, particularly men, would rather fight than connect. We'd rather be in an aggressive stance than a vulnerable stance. But it turns out, and Brene Brown has shown this as well, that being vulnerable is really good for you. It's really good for you. Now, you don't want to be vulnerable to your worst enemy, but opening yourself up, and you can almost feel this intuitively, opening yourself up, getting close to another person. Once you take that chance, then you have this glow, at its most extreme, we call it falling in love. But it can happen in smaller doses every day in little ways, smiling at the guy behind the counter at the checkout counter, or waving to the person across the street. I now walk my dog once or twice a day, and I'm saying hello to all the other people out walking their dogs and getting doses of, we call it the other vitamin C, Vitamin Connect. And if you can build that into your life in little ways, much like exercise, it gives you these doses of these various neurotransmitters and hormones and peptides, and it's not just oxytocin, the bonding hormone. It's all other kind of stuff. And people who live a richly connected life, studies of the little village in Italy, why did they live so long? It's because they all knew each other and they supported each other and they never felt alone. And it's just, John and I are trying to emphasize, this is not so much new knowledge, although the pinning it down scientifically is new, but we've always known that love was a good medicine. But it doesn't have to be as extreme as love. Just like is a good medicine. And right now in this country, we're suffering from a big epidemic of dislike. So if we can start building bridges and reaching out and healing wounds, we will not only be happier, we'll be healthier. And it's good for ADHD, because if you're living in a state of disconnection, that is very distracting.
Right. And there is so much evidence that's now pouring out. And it's really in the past 10 years that people are looking at it scientifically. And we have data showing that if you improve your connection, your social network, the more times you know new people, it's 3 times more powerful than stopping smoking, for instance, which is a horrible risk factor, and 5 times more powerful than if you take your medicine as your doctor prescribed later in life. So that you really we really know that connection is so powerful. And you see this in all the menus for anti-aging. Right at the top of the list is connection. Right under that is exercise, of course, but it's those two really make your brain sing, and it's something that we really need in our lives. And this is so difficult with COVID now, but people find many ways to connect. So.
And it's fun, you know. I mean, it's connection is one of the few things in life that's free, fun, and good for you.
Right. I
mean, and exercise is too if you do it right. I've learned my fun exercise now is walking my dog.
Well, that's a great exercise because you get the connection there too.
Right.
Yes, it's so great. Dogs are such a powerful tool, and I know you agree, Ned. So.
Oh my God, my dedication of the book was to dogs. It's no accident that God spelled backwards as dog. Well, you should go to the next slide.
Next slide.
There's John with his kettlebell.
Yeah, and you with your book.
Me with the books I've written. Yeah, it's,
we have the chapter in the book called "Finding the Right Difficult," which is basically finding the thing or the group of activities or missions that you put in your life, including the people you're with, that you want around you. You want to surround yourself with things that keep your attention. So, the activity, something like Ned was saying, open yourself up to be vulnerable. The activities that are difficult, that you can learn to enjoy and master, just like me with my kettlebell there. And, it's not fun, but it gets to be easier as time goes on. And the same, but it forces your attention to work overtime.
But it has to, if I can interrupt you, it has to be the right difficult, because we've spent our lifetime, people with ADD, being told we don't do this well, that well, the other thing well. And it's true, we're bad at a lot of things, but usually we're exceptionally good at something. With John, it may be exercise. With me, it may be writing. And that's your right difficult, the thing that's difficult that you have a talent for. That's what you want to, it's the creative outlet. We need that creative outlet. So the two prerequisites got to be difficult, challenging, and it's got to matter to you. Those two, when those two conditions are met, then you get this skyrocket of growth, and you build a career. You build a mission. So you want to find your right difficult, and then throw your heart and soul into it. And that's a career. That's a successful career. Find your right difficult. You can find it at 6 years old. I mean, I started writing when I was in 5th grade, so John started exercising. He became a top tennis player. I mean, so, it's not for the prizes and trophies. It's for the development of everything that matters in life: satisfaction, joy, health, make a living, whatever. But find your right difficult. We need a creative outlet. People with ADD need a creative outlet. We're like cows. We need to be milked. And if I don't have a book going, I get depressed. If John doesn't have exercise regularly, like most people, he doesn't feel right. So whatever your right difficult is, and for a lot of people with ADD, it's some kind of entrepreneurial activity, building a business, planning a trip around the world, something that involves something big and something that allows you to express your imagination.
Next slide, please.
Well, we're going to run out of time, so we won't have time for questions. So let's do this one quickly, John. You want to?
Yeah. Creating the stellar environment means really putting people and yourselves in the right environment to thrive. The right job, the right spouse, the right friendship, the right group that you're affiliated with, so that will give you positivity and decrease any kind of shame and humiliation that so many ADD people are full of. So
exactly, that means get out of the ugly environments, get out of the environments that are shaming, humiliating, ridiculing you, and don't feel you have to be subject to that. So I always say, marry the right person, find the right job. So be with people who admire you, like you, value you, have fun with you. And stay away from people who devalue you and insult you. And, it sounds like an obvious thing, but a lot of time people with ADHD feel like they deserve to be put down, insulted, and ridiculed. So you don't.
Or they get into trying to prove that they can do it.
Right.
In ridiculous kinds of situations, they want to prove that they can really do it.
Right.
Even though they're vastly successful in other areas. It's just... Right. Anyway, next slide.
Probably the most common example of that is the person who's trying to please an unpleasable parent who's passed away, and you're still trying to do that. Anyway, Exercise. John, your wheelhouse, please take it away.
Now, the power of exercise we learned right from the beginning of our journey with ADD, because so many of the parents were saying, oh, she's so good whenever she's have soccer that semester or that quarter. But after that, she's a nightmare because the exercise does so much to our brains in every way, and especially with attention. It all comes through the attention system. So simply put, I say that a bout of exercise is like taking a little bit of Ritalin and a little bit of Prozac, because you exercise so much of your brain when you're exercising. And it can be anything. It can be dance. It can be walking the dog, which is a perfect combination of so many different parts of what is useful for the brain. Being outside, being in nature, being with someone you love, and making you feel good. Because when the dog looks back at you and you smile, it gets you to want to do it again. And you need to have that sort of reinforcement with any exercise, so that it's just something that we have always recommended very high on our list of things to pay attention to. And we now know a lot more of the science as to why this makes it so special. And so get moving is a big answer to some of the big questions of what you should be doing.
And don't forget, making love is a form of exercise. So you can include that in your daily regimen. Well, this is the most powerful tool everyone fears, and we won't spend a lot of time on this, but I think we want to drive home the message: you should respect medication, but not fear it. And as medications go in the entire pharmacopoeia, the medicines we use to treat ADHD are among the safest. Yes, they can be dangerous, but as long as you're in the hands of a doctor who knows what he or she is doing, they are among the safest medications we have. And used properly, they can be a godsend, an absolute godsend, as powerful a life changer as eyeglasses. And indeed, they are quite similar to eyeglasses. They don't always work. In my own case, prescription meds don't work, but happily, caffeine does. So I get my medication at Starbucks or some other coffee counter. But 80% is a pretty good track record. The sad part is most people who come to see John or me, first words out of their mouth, don't want medication. I don't want to drug my kid, or I don't want to drug myself. And they invoke that word in a very pejorative way. And it's once they learn the facts, most of them, unless it's against their religion, say, yeah, let's give it a try. Because a trial of medication is just that. It's a trial. It doesn't have to last longer than a day. It's not surgery. It's totally reversible. What would you add to that, John?
No, and we see so many people who aren't on medicine or had been on it once, but wanted to get the first thing they want to do is wean themselves off of it, get off of it, and this is the wrong way to think of it. It's something that's useful, and with our ADD medicine especially, is very light on any side effects. Very, very seldom do we see side effects that prevent a full and happy life. And it's just something that really we have to shift our view of what ADD medicine can do for us, and see it as being something to help us propel us forward into into a positive lifestyle. So I think that's putting it all together. Yeah.
Yeah, that's find your feel and make it real. And it is the treatment, if you want to call it that. I prefer to say we unwrap your gifts. You come to see us to get your gifts unwrapped, not to have a disability treated. And the best way to unwrap your gift, using all the tips we've talked about today, but individualize it. Find your feel and make it real, sort of like a golf swing. Every swing is different. There are certain basics to a good golf swing, but everyone has a different way. I wrote a poem to my daughter when she's now 31, when she was about 8 years old. And the last lines were, no brain is the same. No brain is the best. Each brain finds its own special way. And that's what you want to do with this. Find your brain's special way. Find your best way of managing your ADHD. And if you do, you'll turn it into an asset. You'll turn this potential demon, this potential life ruiner, into a truly life enhancer, a very special power that, and that's why John and I love our work, because we really want people to understand that managed properly, this condition can take you to the heights. It does not have to hold you back at all. It can propel you to a much better life. Don't be afraid of it. Embrace it and learn about it. John and I are still learning about it, and we've been at it for quite a while. So, but once you get some basic principles down, this gift can absolutely be unwrapped. So
do you want to mention your?
No, those are, if you want to see, I did about 40 TikTok talks, 60 seconds a piece. They're if you just go to TikTok, we've got a lot of pithy little bits of advice in them. Okay. Those are just comments from the TikTok. All right, John. Okay. Well, now we'll turn it over to Dr. Kalin and have questions.
Yeah, a lot of questions. I wanted to start generally because this parent has a newly diagnosed 9-year-old child, and she wants to turn the ADHD experience. She wants to manage it, but she wants to turn it into a positive thing, increasing his self-esteem. Any tips and suggestions on how to begin this journey now that he's been diagnosed?
Positive framework, race car brain with bicycle brakes. I can't stress it enough. John and I have found it's much more than semantics. So like proposing a new term, calling it VAST instead of ADHD, it's much more than semantics. It's much more than window dressing. It gets to the very heart of how you feel about having this condition. So say to your child, I have great news for you. You've got an amazing brain. You've got a Ferrari for a brain. You have bicycle brakes, but that's okay. We can strengthen your brakes. But what you have, you can't buy and you can't teach. Your creativity, your originality, your pizzazz, your sparkle, your vigor, your vim, your zest. So framing it like that is incredibly important. And you want to get you and your husband or your wife and your grandmother and your grandfather and the teacher and the pediatrician and all the people in the child's world on the same page about this. And Race Car Brain with Bicycle Brake is accurate. It's simple. It's easy to comprehend for a 6-year-old or a 76-year-old. That is the most important way to begin. To begin by, we're here to unwrap a gift, not treat a disability.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of bicycle brakes, several people have brought up the concept of bicycle brakes, and they're in terms of emotions. And they're saying, okay, I know I have bicycle brakes, but I tend to get angry so easily. How can I strengthen those brakes to keep me from, raging or getting upset when I shouldn't?
Well, there's lots of ways of doing that, but the best way is to build your resilience around it. Know that this is going to happen and that you're not going to let yourself get into that bad news or that bad action. I spent a lifetime part of my lifetime chasing aggression with medicine, with beta blockers and with the stimulants, and that really helps. It really can help if the anger is too much. Using some of our medication tools can be very, very useful. And I spent a good portion of my career as researching the beta blockers, and because it really works to quiet down the system and prevent you from losing control. And it's one thing that I'm seeing more and more people with this as a problem, especially in their COVID environment.
Yeah. One woman is asking, why does it feel like my symptoms have gotten worse with stress during the pandemic? Does stress impact your ADHD symptoms?
I mean, sure. Stress impacts everything. And of course, you gotta define stress a little bit, because there's good stress, like lifting weights or John's kettlebells. It's toxic stress that makes everything bad. And that's living in the default mode network, that's toxic stress, a real common one for people with ADHD. And yes, it makes all the symptoms worse, because when you're feeling persecuted and bad about yourself, I mean, you all your reserves get depleted, all your goodwill, all your patience. So, by the way, that word patience, it's a wonderful word. It literally means, it comes from the Latin word patior, which means to suffer. So patience means the power of suffering, and stress reduces your power of suffering. It makes you impatient. It makes you irritable. So yes, you want to do everything you can to reduce toxic stress, but lay it on with the good stress, the exercise, the revising your paper, the taking a chance and raising your hand in class, that kind of thing. That's good stress. You want to promote that, but reduce toxic stress.
No, the attention system and anxiety or stress are two parts of the same coin. That if you're more anxious and more stressed, your attention is going to suffer. And if you're more attentive or you're more focused, your attention and your stress will be reduced.
And to come back to what she said about COVID, social isolation, which we're all experiencing in COVID, is very stressful. The most ancient form of punishment, more feared than the death penalty, was to be banished, to be put into a state of social isolation. It's horrible. It's extremely stressful.
Right. This person at the other end of the spectrum, this person is saying, I was just evaluated at age 64. What Yikes, what should I do now? Can I take ADHD medication?
You certainly can, depending on your cardiac status and working with your doctor. Sure, you can. I mean, it is really throughout life. It's a safe medicine. Ritalin, for instance, was allowed for kids and for the elderly to help promote more enthusiasm and motivation as in the aged, but it certainly can be used at any time along the life cycle. I've had, and Ned as well, we've had people in their 80s, and with a little bit of medicine, it's made a big difference. It's kept people focused enough to continue with their retirement or their life. So it's good news that you finally know. And it may mean that you don't need medicine, but if you do, don't be afraid of it.
My patient in his 80s was able to write the book he'd wanted to write his whole life long. And, so it's a myth out there. I get it from my patients often that, my doctor said I'm too old to take stimulant medication. And it's somehow, sure, you have to look at your cardiac status. You have to look at, blood pressure, heart rate, and EKG and whatnot. But there's no absolute that over the age of 65 you can't take stimulant medication. That's completely wrong. And unfortunately, a lot of doctors believe it's true. Well, it's definitely not true.
Mm-hmm. Someone asks, does ADHD get worse during the teen years?
Everything is worse during
the teen years are intensifiers of pretty much everything, like John said. The teen years are intensifiers. So you're just turning up the heat of life in many different ways during the teen years.
But on the other hand, if they find something that they love, and
exactly,
that intensity can be a very positive direction.
Exactly, the right love affair, the right you fall in love. I gave a talk at my old high school, and I said to them, the goal of high school is not to get into the best college in the world; it's to fall in love with a person, with an activity, with a musical instrument, with a period of history, with a blade of grass. The goal of high school is to fall in love, and it really is. If you can do that, then you're feeding off of that. I mean, I fell in love with writing in high school, and I'm still writing. John fell in love with tennis, and he's still, exercise has become a big part of his professional life.
Okay. Yeah, I like that answer. Speaking of teens and intensity, there are a lot of articles that have been written about entrepreneurship and ADHD traits and how the two match very well together. One mom is trying to push her son, because he seems to be leaning in that direction, in the direction of entrepreneurship or starting a small business. What are the traits that ADHD brings to the table when it comes to that?
Well, creativity, persistence, enthusiasm, interest, abhorring boredom. You're looking for the new, and you'll find it. Seeing that the emperor has no clothes, which is often a plus minus trait for the ADD person, but they know that like Ned and I really share this trait, that just because it's not allowed, or the going wisdom is not do this or do that or see this way, but when you see it and you say, hey, this is the way it really is. That's what the creative moment becomes. You see something different and you follow it, and you persist in following it, and you create a new company, So for that mom, I think, push your child to start something and get the experience of starting something. It doesn't have to be the next Facebook. It can be anything that's going to occupy his attention and his interests, and maybe make him a little money.
Mm-hmm. Is there any research on mindfulness or gratitude inventory or other cognitive strategies that work well for ADHD?
Well, Lydia Zylowska, Zylowska, wrote a whole book about this. It's called The Mindfulness Cure for Adult ADHD. And they did this research, 25 years ago. And they found that a three-month course of mindfulness training achieved results comparable to medication. So the problem with mindfulness training and meditation is we all praise it, but not that many of us do it. You know, it's I don't think anyone would disagree that it's really good for you in a host of ways. But it's like exercise. You want to find a practice that you will do over time instead of just saying, yeah, it's good for you. Well, how are you going to enact it? In my own case, I pray in the shower. So that's my version of mindfulness. I like to do that, and it's become reflexive. But if you want a book about it, Lydia's book is the best one that I know of anyway.
Mm-hmm.
John, do you have any? Mindfulness. Oh, there we go. See, I'm not, this is not to embarrass you. It happened to me the other day. We just caught John in an ADD moment. He was somewhere else. I'll tell you what happened to me the other day. I was talking to a friend, and she was telling me about this horrible experience where a woman was having her children taken away from her by the state. And I wasn't listening. But I knew it came to a point in the conversation where I was supposed to say something. So I said, "Oh, that's wonderful." She said, "What do you mean that's wonderful? She's having her children taken away." I said, "Oh my God, I'm really sorry. I had drifted off." But when I said, "Oh, that's wonderful," these little moments of ADD happen to us all.
Yeah.
Well, no, I had to respond to a note from Wayne. So, in any case, that was where my attention went. Woo! But that happened too much for us. But we live with it, and we understand it, and we joke with it. We joke with ourselves, and not beat ourselves up about it.
Right. Don't feel ashamed of it. It's a funny part of life if you let it be funny. And obviously, if you're spacing out and drive through a stop sign, that's not funny. But do your best to stay engaged. And I know we're out of time now. I just want to thank John for taking. John and I are having a lot of fun doing these talks, and it's been just a wonderful relationship since 1979. And I hope you all will let us know what you think of our book, ADHD 2.0.
Right. It's really nice to renew our relationship in these settings, and especially with ADDitude.
Yes.
Such a good promoter of good information about ADHD, and putting down some of the cranky, crazy stuff that also gets thrown up with ADD because it's so ubiquitous. And so thank you.
Yep. Well, the hour is up, and thanks so much for you both being here. It was excellent as usual. So thank you again. I'm glad you could make time for us in our community.
Thank you, guys.
Well, good luck and keep it up.
And thanks to all of the attendees for joining us. Please join us again on April 6th when Dr. William Dotson will talk about the latest science on managing ODD and conduct disorder.
I just add to that, he is great. He is really one of the really savvy, experienced clinicians. Don't miss it. He's one.
Yes,
thank you. Thanks. And
we quote him a few times in our new books.
Yeah.
He's an important character.
Take care, you guys. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.